So hello, my name is E.A.Koetting. I've written several books on occult and spirituality, specifically practical spirituality. My whole approach is that spirituality is fine and great, but you have to be able to use it for something. It's actually there as a tool for us to make changes in our lives. One of the big things that I've kind of come at this with is that this is actually not just a tool for us to be able to do little things here and there, but to actually make dramatic change, to be able to literally control all of the elements of the physical world and bring to yourself anything that you might want, anything that you need, and then to develop what I call the philosopher's stone, and a lot of people call it that, which in ancient times, people believed that there was an element, that if you took this element and used it in alchemical operations, you can take any material and transmute it into another material. So you take copper and turn it to gold. But a greater alchemy was to be able to take something that doesn't exist at all, something that's just in your imagination, and condense it into physical form. So you could, in front of you, materialize an object. As I've spent my time in research looking into the occult and how to do this, it seems to me that evocation is that key to being able to bring whatever you want, materialize it in front of you in a real substantial form, and then have that have a permanent endurance. And I'll kind of explain what all that means as we go forward. But evocation is kind of a new thing for a lot of people, and they'll equate it a lot with invocation, which they're two completely different sciences. Invocation is when you're calling a presence, a force, or a consciousness into yourself, and you're allowing that to operate through you, or you're calling it into the area, and it's a lot more general. Whereas evocation, you're actually calling a consciousness into form in front of you, where you can behold it and speak to it just like one person speaks to another. So that's really that's really what evocation is being able to call an entity that does not exist in the physical world in front of you in beholdable form. And one of the big things that I've seen as I've gotten into evocation is that it's a lot easier than most people try to make it seem. And I actually think, I don't get into conspiracy theories, but there's one conspiracy that it seems to me like a lot of the religious institutions out there, a lot of the political institutions, have really tried to make it seem like this stuff is untouchable. And that's why you have like the Templars and the Masons that had massive control over all of this. And they're like, yeah, you're just not smart enough, you're not initiated enough, you don't have the right handshakes to have this information. When in reality, it's some of the easiest stuff that we do. And I do think that once you start getting into the states necessary for evocation, you'll really start seeing that it is extremely easy and very natural to do these things. That this is part of kind of our hardwiring as human beings, is to be spiritual beings and to really be able to have these powers. So there are some, what I call the elementary principles of evocation, and I've written about this in a couple of my books, and it's kind of, as I looked at evocation, I noticed that you have the Golden Dawn that was saying this is one way to do it, you have the OTO saying no, it's this way, you have all these groups that are like, no, this is the right way to do it. And you see this with religion a lot. There's a lot of debate about, how things are supposed to be done, the specific keys, but when you break it down, they all have a similar vein or similar structure of steps, and they don't really even realize it. You notice that the same Jesus, Virgin Mary birth story is in every single religion, just told in different ways. And so you've got that a lot with just about every major aspect of spirituality, that you have the same stories being told over and over again, but they're just given kind of a different vocabulary. So in that, I looked at evocation, what it is that actually makes it work, and I've come up with 9 elementary principles of evocation. And I'll just go through these real quick. Preparatory immersion. Basically, that's saying that you have to invest yourself into the process, into the spirit you're going to be summoning, into the system of it. One of the big things I'll have people come to me and be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go do an evocation tonight, and I'll prove that none of this is true because the spirit's not going to show up. Well, okay, that's what you're aiming for, and you're going to get it. But if you actually immerse yourself into the system, and it's called subjective synthesis, is what it actually is where you immerse yourself in the system enough that your thinking about it starts to change, where you're like, not only is this possible, but you start getting excited for it. You start start feeling those energies, those forces, those consciousnesses around you. And most people, when they start preparing for a ritual like this, they'll actually get to that point where they're like, I'm preparing for the ritual, but I can hear the spirits talking to me, or they start having dreams about it. And that's really the intensity that you need to get into the preparatory immersion aspect of it, reading about the spirit, reading about evocation, whatever system you're going to use to really invest yourself in it. And then the next is use of a working system. So that, and I specifically put a working system in there because there are a lot of systems out there that just simply don't work. Where you know, if you just light some incense and candles and then scream at the top of your lungs for demons to show up, it's just not going to happen. But there are systems that actually do work. They work consistently. They work accurately every time. And you know, the Golden Dawn has formulated some great systems of evocation. The Ordo Templi Orientis has kind of followed up on that as well. And those are some of the cornerstones of what magic and ritual looks like today. It comes from specifically those two groups. And so that's a lot of what I've based my own practice on, are the teachings of those Hermetic groups. And why that's important, and why you can't just like scream for demons to come and they come, is really that there's a consciousness, almost like a field of consciousness that surrounds everything. I actually have a theory that we've got the dimensions of height, depth, width, the fourth dimension of time, but there's a fifth dimension of consciousness that is surrounding everything and imbuing everything. The consciousness is a dimension just as solid as let's say, time or any of the three dimensions. And there are certain systems that kind of have embedded themselves into this field of consciousness over time. And that's why you'll see things like Haitian Vodun and the Zulu religion of Africa are extremely potent in their effects because they're so old and they're so embedded into that matrix of thought. Now, one part is the Theta Gamma Sync, and in my books I refer to this as attainment of omnipotence, but that throws a lot of people off because they're like, well, that's way too high for me to get into. Theta Gamma Sync is basically a brainwave state. So you've got, let me have a marker out. So you've got basic alpha and beta wavelengths that your brain normally operates on. And those are basically, if you're just sitting there reading a book or watching TV, or if you're in intense study, you're going to be in alpha or beta brainwave states. You also have delta, which is sleep. Now, right before you hit delta, you've got what's called the theta brainwave state. And most people don't really stay in theta very long. They pass through it as they fall asleep. This is where you have hypnagogic hallucinations, where you'll be asleep before your body actually goes into paralysis, and you'll be like ice skating, and you'll fall and jerk yourself back awake. That's the theta gamma, or that's the theta state. What they started noticing, if people hold this consciously, that something interesting starts happening. They'll be in this theta state, and all of a sudden they'll trigger a massive peak in their brainwave activity. Now, normally, at the highest states of conscious alertness, you're running at about 70 hertz. So they've actually measured that, 70 hertz. But then they started getting people into these brainwave states, into the theta, having hold that through, normally through meditation. They've also used different psychotropics and such to get people there. That they'll hold it just for a few minutes, and they start triggering this massive, massive flux. And this has gone up as high as 200 hertz. So they didn't think that was even possible. They thought 70 was the peak of what our brain is even capable of. But then they get people into these same states of ritual, meditation, prayer, anything that really taps into that spiritual state, And all of those are requiring that you drop yourself into the theta state. And the theta is optimally 4.5 hertz. So if you're able to hold that, you start triggering these. Now, what's interesting is that these two states of the gamma, they started referring to that as gamma, and the theta are linked, kind of like a kite string. As soon as people will get excited about it and go, oh, check it out, I'm seeing things, and I have this extrasensory perception, whatever. As soon as they emotionally get excited about it and pull themselves out of that deep mellow state, boom, these go back down to alpha and beta. So the only way to be able to trigger these really, really high frequencies of brainwave activity is to really remain in that really steady, calm theta state. And once again, most religion, most spiritual exercises are designed to get people there and hold them there. Most meditations, mantras, prayers, all of that is specifically designed for this. So whoever the geniuses were at the beginning of human history that started putting together these religious systems kind of had that figured out in a more primitive way. We've also noticed that most tribal music, drum playing, etc., most music people use in ritual would be at 4.5 beats per second. So there's a really cool connection there between that music that gets people into those states and that brainwave state. So that is absolutely essential, not just to evocation, but to really any spiritual art, to be able to get into that brainwave state. The next is substantial contact with the spirit that you're trying to evoke. And that's usually done through, like I said, hermetics is a system that's kind of matriculated down to a science that we use for a lot of the cornerstone practices of occultism now. And so we'll use sigils, which are basically symbols that represent the spirit. You can also make that substantial contact with using their name, using prayers or mantras associated with that spirit. If you're gonna use, because you can use the same ritual setup that I'm talking about to call upon the spirit of a deceased person, and whether or not that's actually their spirit or it's just a concoction of different forces and consciousness is a completely different story. But you can use the same thing, and in order to get that substantial contact, you can use photographs, pieces of their clothing, sometimes bones or pieces of their body that you're able to somehow get your hands on. Then you need incantation, and you look at that word, and it's basically a song. That's basically what the etymology of that word means, is song. But it's really an oration that you're giving. There's something very powerful and atavistic about the spoken word, that when you speak something, you make it true. You notice in just about every religious myth that God spoke and then everything was created, that there's a power in speaking. And so that's something that you absolutely need. You can do a lot of the communication, a lot of the things in ritual internally, but there is a point where you definitely need to have the spoken word there. And then communication. This is where just about every evocation falls apart. So you'll go through the ritual, go through the steps, and they don't really know it, but there's a spirit that's starting to form in front of them, and then they're just looking and they're going, well, it didn't happen, I give up, I'm done, because they haven't learned how to communicate with the spirit. And there are some ways you can do that through scrying, that you can see it. Eventually, if you perform evocation to the point where you get comfortable enough with it, you're going to have a complete alteration of your five senses, where you'll actually see, hear the spirit, you'll smell it. At times you'll even be able to reach out and touch it and have it touch you back and feel its actual body that's manifested there. And so getting into that state of being able to communicate it with it once it's there is absolutely essential, because like I said, that's where most evocation just falls apart. And then issuing a task. So calling a spirit just to see if it's going to show up, it'll work, but then making enemies with those entities you're trying to call up because you're wasting their time. Really, you're wasting your time. When it comes down to it, because I get asked this a lot, well, what are demons? What are angels? What are spirits? Well, you know, I really don't know. What it seems like to me, though, is that they are power and consciousness embodied. And if there's one thing that power wants to do, it's to act. Power always wants to act. Knowledge always wants to expand itself. And so that's really, if you're going to call a spirit to perform a task for you, you just have to be clear on what that task is, what it is you want them to do. If you're trying to receive information, same thing. So you would call it up and basically have a list of questions that you would ask it. And then dismissal, and that can be anything as simple as, well, thanks for coming, but now you're free to leave. Or you can go through all sorts of operations to exercise the home and do banishing rituals. It can be as elaborate or as minimal as you feel like you need to have it. I personally don't do banishings, but I've got an office space that I'm able to do this. If I'm doing evocation in my home, I'll almost always banish the energies because I've got a daughter living there and it can make some crazy stuff happen when you start. And that's really one key to being able to look at it and go, well, maybe I'm not just crazy, because there's always the philosophy out there that evocation is controlled hallucination. But there is something happening in the real world there when you start having all sorts of poltergeist activity in your home, when you have people coming into your house and they feel like they've got to walk through cobwebs to get through the door, that maybe there is something actually going on there. And then you have psychological retraction. And this is something that I haven't seen a whole lot of other teachers and authors in occultism talk about, but if you go through this process, this ritual, you're altering your brainwave states, you're altering your emotional states, your physiological states to immense degrees. And if you just kind of leave it lingering and hanging there, and then try to go to sleep or whatever, you're actually going to have a bit of a hard time getting on with it. So psychological retraction is necessary to kind of pull yourself back from the ritual. That you perform this massive ritual, you've spoken with an entity that is not physical at all, but has appeared to you, to all of your senses. You've had a conversation, gotten whatever information, you've sent it on a task. This is really intense stuff, and you need to bring yourself back into these alpha and beta brainwave states. Watching TV doesn't usually do it because you're just basically going to space out. You're not going to be paying attention to the show, and you're still going to be thinking about this. Your brainwave states are still going to be kind of enmeshed in the theta state. What I've found is, and this is something silly that a lot of people are like, really? But make a sandwich. For some reason, doing something where you're actually involved in the process, where you don't just turn on a movie or whatever, where you're actually involved in the process, making a sandwich, making food, you're doing something that you're actually involved in, brings your brainwave states right back to where they ought to be, and then you can kind of let the ritual go do what it's going to do. So that's the outline of the elementary principles. This is what actually is the foundation that causes evocation to work. So any questions before we go on from there? Yes, sir.
When the brainwave spikes to 200, what do people report experiencing, or do they have memories or thoughts or dreams or?
Yes. When it goes as high as 200, I mean that's pretty high. When it goes that high, most of the time it's really kind of an ephemeral idea of I saw a bright light and I felt love, maybe whatever, almost like an afterlife experience. When it goes about halfway range, when it goes 100, 150 hertz, most people have an experience of first an extra sensory experience, but not in that psychic type of way, but in the fact that all of their senses seem to peak massively. So their vision, their color perception, their hearing, even their tactile senses are all buzzing and very much alive. And then depending on what they're doing with that, if they're meditating for a specific purpose, they're going to actually reach that or have some kind of mystical experience that's going to link up with whatever their intention was. Because this is something that hardly anybody ever accidentally gets into that theta gamma sync. Most of the time it's really controlled. The only time people do is before and after sleep. So that's almost all the time when you hear people have these spontaneous manifestations of spirits in their home, or they're hearing footsteps in the hallway, or they astral project suddenly. Almost all the time it's either right as they're falling asleep or right before they wake up, because that's when your brain is pulling into and diving out of the delta state and into theta, and so they're just holding that for a bit longer than normal. So yeah, people do experience or report experiences, usually of a spiritual nature, usually having something to do with whatever their specific religious paradigm is. So, and once again, it's very much like a out-of-body near-death experience that people report, where it's linked into whatever their psychology and their personal mythos is that governs their life. Did that answer that?
Yes.
All right.
Thanks.
Anything else before we go on? No. All righty. So the biggest question that people have as they're getting into this is, how do you get into the theta gamma sync? Because if that's the key that holds it all together, well, how do you get there? The first thing is that people try too hard to induce these states. It's something that that you'll probably find yourself falling into. And when I said that people don't accidentally get into that state, that's not entirely true, because people do, but they're only there for a couple seconds. If you let your mind drift off, and I used to do this at church all the time, because church was boring. I was raised LDS, and it was just a time for me just to space out. And so I start spacing out on whoever's speaking up there. And the first thing that I would notice is I would start to see an aura just expand over them. So I'd see just a light expand over their shoulders and their head, and then I would start feeling myself lose equilibrium, where I felt like I was tumbling around in space. It was really hard to tell where my body was positioned at. And as I started getting, and I just had that experience pretty much my whole life, as I started getting into the occult and into actually doing something with spirituality, I started noticing, well, this exact state that you need to get into to get any of these rituals to work is that exact state of almost a detachment from your physical body, but at the same time, a heightened sense of your physical senses. So being able to get into that state is actually pretty easy. It's going to be a matter of letting your body relax. So that's the first thing. I'll guide people through just a guided hypnosis of feeling like there's a bright light over your head, and you breathe in and you feel that light comes into the top of your head. And you breathe out and you feel like it glows brighter, and then breathe back in and pull it down, and where that light touches, your body relaxes. So you can feel, and I'll go through, if I'm doing this with a person, I'll go through, all the body parts. Your ears are relaxed, your neck is relaxed, and go down until it touches their feet, and their whole body is in relaxation. So that's the first part of it. Just about everybody who has issues with getting into the theta gamma sync is because they can't get their body or their mind relaxed. So going through a quick 5-10 minute meditation or self-hypnosis to get the body and mind relaxed is going to be very important. At that point, one of the easiest ways I like to get people into the theta gamma sync is to have them look at where the wall and the ceiling meet. So we've got this line that's created by the meeting of the wall and the ceiling. So you look up there, and your line of vision is automatically going to stop at objects. Well, you have to kind of trick your eyes and pull your line of vision back towards you just a couple feet until the wall starts to blur a bit. So your vision starts to blur a little bit, almost like you're looking at a glass plate that's between that meeting of the wall and the ceiling and yourself. And as you do that, you're going to start seeing your eyes doing these little speckles all over the air. And most people, if you're just gazing off and spacing out, you'll see that. And if you gaze at that a little more and stay in that relaxed state, you're going to see those little speckles actually form what Stuart Wilde calls static rain, where it actually looks like it's a sheet of rain in front of you that's just standing there in the air. Now, gazing at that, you're going to start feeling yourself tumbling around. You're going to start feeling your equilibrium completely lose itself. It's going to feel like the floor is dropped out from underneath you and you're tumbling around in space. And that there is the theta gamma sync. Most people will experience that and they'll go, well, where's this great mystical experience? Well, at that point, you're just barely over 70 hertz. And you're just barely in the theta gamma sync. So in order to basically increase that, you've got to get to what I call the rapture. And what that is, in Christian mythology, you've got the rapture where Jesus comes and lifts people up into the clouds to avoid the apocalypse. And obviously that's not what I'm necessarily going for. But the rapture is a state where your body, your mind, and your emotions are so overwhelmed by the experience that they start to shut out this world. And what that's going to feel like when you're in the middle, especially of an evocation, is it almost feels like you're about to black out. You can feel you can see your vision start to narrow in. It feels like you're hyperventilating, but you're not breathing any harder than normal. You can feel your blood moving differently. You can feel your lungs working differently. All of your body gets into this. And that's really a key component to this, is a lot of people focus on changing your psychological states. And that's really easy. But to get into something where you're actually changing your brainwave frequency requires physiological shifts, not just psychological shifts. So getting your whole body into the experience in something like an evocation, where we're doing the incantation is a good example of that, is I'll keep my incantations pretty short. I'll keep it, if I want to do an evocation, let's say of a spirit Sastan, I would say, rather than having this lengthy half-hour conjuration that I've got to either memorize or read out of a book, I'll just say, Sastan come, and I'll say it again and again and again, and it creates almost a mantra. And then I'll find as I'm doing that my whole body's getting into it. I'm rocking back and forth, or usually that's the case, is that I'll find myself rocking back and forth with the rhythm of that mantra. And that gets your whole physiology into it, gets your blood moving in a different way, gets your brain processing information in a different way. And then what happens is when you hit that state of rapture, where you do feel like you're about to lose consciousness, that's when really the magic starts to happen. That's when, rather than losing consciousness, all of a sudden the smoke that's coming out of the sensor starts to take on a body. And that's where the normal static noises in the air start to form actual words that are being spoken to you. And some people, a lot of people that I teach evocation to, will go through this process, and they'll report that basically the physical world, as they see it, either disappears or takes a back seat to the spiritual world that's evolving around them. And so they'll have the spirit there, and then everything else will just kind of get fuzzy. That it'll take a backstage to whatever's taking place in front of you in the triangle. So that's that. Any other questions before we move forward? The basic implements of evocation. A lot of people, like if you look at the Golden Dawn rituals, or the OTO rituals, they're really elaborate. They're using like Egyptian headdresses and robes, and they've got staffs of all sorts of colors, and with Hebrew words and names around them. That's not really necessary. That's all part of really, when you get into it, that's all part of trying to get a person into the theta gamma sync. Because you get all these things, and it basically distracts your mind from what you're actually doing, so that way you're not thinking about it consciously. You're getting the brain out of the way by having all of this elaborate ritual. All that's really necessary, all that's necessary is a circle, is a good thing to have. You can even do without that, and some incense. But to start out with, when you're first starting evocation, it is a good idea to have a circle, candles, incense, and then a triangle of manifestation. So this circle I've designed from some of the evocations that I've done. One of the things about it, like I said, it's really easy when you're doing this kind of stuff to write it off as just insanity. That you're so completely gone that you're talking to people that nobody else can see. But then you start to have things happen where you ask them to do things in your life and they actually do them every time, exactly as you asked them to do. Or they start delivering information you otherwise couldn't access. Now, one of those pieces, it was probably 2002 or 2003, I was doing some evocations, and this lettering here I've got on this circle was just given to me by spirits. They're like, hey, look at this, write it down. So I did that. I sat on this for ever since then, not really knowing what it is, but going, okay, I can feel that there's some kind of power with those letters. I had a guy that reads my books call me, and he goes, hey, by the way, did you know that that is a specific form of Aramaic? No, I didn't know that. And he goes, yeah, here's what it says. And it's all about, all of these letters, if you translate them from that Aramaic, is all about binding spirits to appear in physical form and keeping them from taking over the world. Because that was a big theme in early evocation, is that not only are you calling spirits up, but you're also keeping them almost at arm's length from completely spilling into this world. You know, well, that is really interesting because I don't know Aramaic. I've never seen Aramaic. But I wrote down these symbols that can easily be translated into one of the oldest forms of Aramaic. I've also had the same thing with receiving things in the African Zulu language, in French, German, Spanish. And these aren't really languages that I speak enough or know enough about to be able to fake that, but I write it down and go, oh, okay, later translate it, type it into Google, and it's like, oh, well, here's what this means. Well, that's pretty cool. So there is a consciousness outside of myself that I'm tapping into through this. So I use this as my basic circle. This is what I actually use for evocation. And I'll have these just two candles at the side. Some people will have lanterns with shields on them that'll create different colors of light that'll glow through the room. And some evocators and teachers will say that that's absolutely necessary, that if you're going to evoke something from the planet Mars, you have to have a red room. That's all just, once again, that's all just to get you into the theta gamma sync. Once you learn how to do that spontaneously, you don't need a lot of that extra ritual. So I'll just have two candles, just enough for light. All of my ritual is simple enough that I don't have to memorize much of anything except for the name of the spirit, and I don't ever have to read anything out of a book. Once again, if you're reading a half-hour conjuration, you're taking yourself out of the theta gamma sync and back into alpha and beta states. So you're actually defeating yourself by getting into these lengthy conjurations and these really elaborate rituals. Now, there's a theory out there that's really prevalent, that the circle protects you from the spirit, and that the triangle of manifestation keeps the spirit in there. And that's completely false. Anybody that's performed enough evocation knows that the spirit's going to do whatever the hell it wants. If it wants to leave the triangle, it's going to. How I've kind of rephrased this is, it just sets in your mind a visual representation of here's where I stand, here's where the spirit stands. So it's just like putting a chair out for a guest. It just sets in your mind, this is how things will proceed. At this point in my own practices, I don't use a triangle of manifestation because I found that once again, the spirit's going to do what it wants. If for some reason it's not wanting to materialize in that triangle, the smoke is going to come up out of the sensor and swirl around to another part of the circle and then start collecting there, and that's when the actual body is going to form. And it's one of those really cool things to see when it does happen, that you're going, well, there's no wind blowing through this room. The AC is not on. There's no reason that this ought to be doing that, but it does. It goes from one part, accumulates there, and that's where the body forms. But for starting out an evocation, it is sometimes a good idea to have the triangle there just so you have that in place of this is where the spirit is going to appear. It just sets that intention in your mind. Now with the incense, that's kind of a mystery of evocation that I don't think I really even have a grasp on. But it seems like the spirit needs something that it can use to materialize a body. And I'm not sure necessarily why that is, but it does seem to be the case. In some evocations and seances and such, we would see that, and it's been photographed, of an ectoplasm coming out of people's mouth, their nostrils, their eyes, their ears, coming out of all of their orifices of their body, and it's photographed almost like a milky fluid that just floats across the air, and that's what the spirit will actually materialize in. But that's far from reliable to be able to use every time you want to do an evocation, to hope that this mysterious fluid that nobody really even knows anything about is going to come out of your body. Basically, the incense or other manifestation base is going to take the place of that. Now, a lot of ritualists will say, well, that can't be so because incense was not always used in evocation. That you look at ancient evocation, you don't see incense burners. But what you do see are animal sacrifices. You'll see, and it'll be pretty well documented that in order to get the spirit to appear, that you need animal sacrifice. The fresh blood, and it has to be fresh blood. You can't get blood, put it in a refrigerator, and then come dump it out. The fresh blood, as it cools, lets off an evaporate, and that's what the actual spirit's going to materialize in. This morning, as I was, I'm editing together a complete works of all of my books into one tome, and I came across a quote from Crowley that I was going to write down and forgot, but he basically said, if you're not able to or not willing to perform an animal sacrifice for this, use incense instead. And I think that's probably the first time, and that was back in the early 1900s, maybe even the late 1800s, that he said that. And I think that's the first time in documentation that it's been said, use incense for an evocation. And it seems to be efficacious, very much so, that's where the spirit will materialize. And you'll notice, as you're doing this, that you'll have the incense rising up off of the censer, and it'll the spirit's body will start to form, and if that incense starts to wane, the materialization of that spirit is going to wane as well. It's going to start to almost disintegrate in front of you. And I'm not sure, once again, why it is that they need that substance to appear, but it seems like they absolutely do. To the point that I've had spirits tell me in evocation, you need more incense. I mean, you got to put more incense for me to keep talking to you. So it is one of those mysteries that seems to work. I don't know how a microwave works, but I know how to use it. So it's kind of a similar thing. I'm not exactly sure why it works, I just know that it does. So also I've got here, I made these sigil plates here. And so that's an example of what a sigil might look like. So one thing that you have in a lot of evocations, like I said, most of it comes from the Golden Dawn, and the Golden Dawn would use they would do what's called a lesser banishing ritual of the pentagram to start all of their rituals. And they would turn to the different quarters and call on the names of Michael, Uriel, Raphael, and help me out, Adam. Michael, Ariel, Raphael, and Uriel? Gabriel. Thank you. All right. You disappoint me.
Oh. I don't work with my reality.
Yeah.
That's what I call it.
But what ritualists will often do is they'll have plates like these sigil plates that they'll put on the walls, or they'll put around the ritual area like that, and they'll go and call out the name. Well, I think that's basically that they've done it that way because they've gotten lazy. Because what actually needs to happen as you're doing this, you're standing in the center of the circle, that you turn to that area and you actually evoke that archangel. You evoke it in front of you, you evoke the next, you have all four of them evoked, and then you stand in the center of the circle and you evoke the spirit that you're trying to evoke in the first place. So it's almost like, well, let's just call their names because we don't want to go through the hassle of evoking them, but that's really how it's supposed to be done. Here I've got, excuse me, here I've got, because I'm definitely more inclined towards the left-hand path and the demonic, I've got the sigils of the gatekeepers here. And the gatekeepers are Belial, Azazel, Amamon, and Abaddon. And those, as far as I'm concerned and have done my work with, are the most powerful demonic entities out there. Now, a lot of people get a little confused when you start talking about demons and demonic entities, and what does that mean? Well, it really doesn't mean a whole lot. It's basically a distinction that people have given to entities. Well, these are the bad ones, so they're demonic. But if you look through the Goetia, you look through the Key of Solomon, you look through all these grimoires where it does actually have the names of demons, you'll notice there are those out there that'll help you heal. They'll teach you about botany. I mean, how is a spirit that's teaching you about botany evil? Not necessarily so. So really, the word demon, and you look at the Greek daimon, and it's a good spirit. So somehow that got perverted into being not good spirit, but evil spirit. It's just a changing of the meanings of the words as part of an imperial type of conquering. And so that's not necessarily the case. I'll still use the word demon when I'm referring to more dark energies. And when I say dark, I mean more relating to the planet Saturn, hidden, mysterious, that'll teach you powers, it'll teach you knowledge that really most people don't possess, or is hidden from the majority. So, any other questions before we keep going?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does it matter what kind of incense you're using?
You know, I use two types of incense, and I've actually gravitated more towards one. Dittany of Crete is a good incense that you can use, and it's basically a type of sage that they get from, that originally grew in Greece, but now it's all over the world. And then I'll use copal resin incense. Now, copal resin is once again, it's a resin from a tree that's basically solidified. You put it on top of hot coals, so you can use hookah coals or even just charcoal. Trickle a couple pebbles on top of there, and it releases a lot of smoke, and it burns clean. If you ever burn frankincense kind of has a dirty burn to it. You can see black smoke rising off of it. With copal, it is basically white the whole time that it burns. It's white smoke. It's not releasing a lot of carbon monoxide when you're doing it. And that's one thing that people will say, well, the reason that you're able to see the spirit is because there's carbon monoxide in the room and you're hallucinating because you've got carbon monoxide poisoning. The amount of carbon monoxide that's being released by incense burning really isn't even close to enough to induce that kind of state. Whereas getting into the theta gamma sync is enough to get you to the point where you do perceive things that are outside of the normal realm of human perception. So copal resin is what I lean more towards. I found with powdered and leafy incense, you have to keep putting it on the coals in order to keep that stream going. Whereas with copal resin, basically just a couple drops and you've got a good half hour of burning and smoke that goes on. So yeah. You do want to be careful when you're using a resin incense that you don't put too much on a coal or it'll cover it and then smother it. So that's a main thing with that. So that's the basic outline of an evocation, but that doesn't really address communication. So how do you actually communicate with the spirit? You can scry for sure, and that's basically you would take you could get a bowl of water, you could get a black mirror. You use all these kinds of scrying devices, gaze into it, and that'll basically trigger your perception into that theta gamma sync. And that's really what these scrying devices allow you to do, is you're looking into this thing and getting yourself into the theta gamma sync, but you can get there without it just as easily. Because I think what a lot of people get into the issue with scrying is they expect it to work like a plasma screen TV. That they look at it, that they do say the right words or whatever, and all of a sudden there's a scene playing out in there, and that's not really how it works at all. You look at the scrying mirror, you will see a white fog cover the surface of the mirror or the crystal ball or the water or whatever you're gazing into. And then once that happens, and that fog that you're seeing is just like seeing the dots of light in the air, and these other triggers of the theta gamma sync. But what happens after that is largely internal. But once you see that white smoke in the mirror, you start making an internal connection to the spirit. You start being able to intuitively know where it's at, what it's doing, what it looks like, what it's saying. There's the matter then of taking those internal communications and filtering them to the external senses. And that happens naturally if you allow it to happen. The key that I give a lot of people to being able to communicate with spirits directly, because I really don't want anybody to get into an evocation and start having to use something like an Ouija board to speak to the spirit. That's just not efficient, it's not reliable. I want you to be able to basically ask a question and get an answer. I mean, it should be real-time communication. And the way that I teach people to do that is to write out on a piece of paper 5 questions that you want that spirit to answer. So if you, even if you're calling it for, to have it perform a task in the world for you or do something for you, you still want to have 5 questions that you ask it. So you perform the ritual of evocation, you'll use its sigil, and incense is burning, you go through the incantation, and then right as soon as you get into that rapture state where you feel your consciousness starting to ebb a bit, then you start asking your questions. So, you can welcome the spirit if you want to, welcome, thank you for appearing. And basically, even if you're not seeing anything at that point, act like you are. Act like it's working. Every time you do it, act like it's working. Because a lot of this does take repetition in order for your senses to start getting what's actually going on. So you do the evocation, and then, okay, now that you're here, now that everything is going the way it should, you have to assume that you're performing the ritual, it's going to happen. Because it is happening, whether or not you can perceive it. So you start asking your questions. So first question is this, second question is this, and then as it answers, write down the answer. So have a question and then have several lines that you can write an answer down. And what you're going to find is you ask a question and almost immediately an internal monologue or dialogue starts playing in your head. That you start getting specific words just appearing in your head out of nowhere. You don't have to sit there and think, well, what is the spirit saying? What would its answer be? It's you ask the question, you get the answer. You start writing it down. The first 2 or 3 questions, you're going to go, well, this is silly. I'm just answering my own questions. But there's something in human psychology that the first time you do anything for the first time, there's going to be a novelty attached to it. So you can go, oh, this is cool. This is the first time I'm doing this. Second time, that novelty is going to start to wear away, but it's still kind of there. It's repetition of, let's see what happens this time. The third and fourth times that you actually do that thing, or where it starts to really click, you actually start having the experience itself, that without that novelty there, without the amazement of, oh wow, this is really happening. And you'll have that as you're writing down these questions and answers, you'll have that novelty of, oh wow, I've got this information, but it might just be my imagination. Well, by the time you get to the third or fourth question, that's going to be out of your head. You're going to really realize that there is something that's speaking to you that you're receiving intuitively and writing down on the paper. Now, at that point, that's still not a spirit in front of you, in full body, speaking to you in a voice that you can hear. That's an intuitive, internal thing. And so, yeah, how's that any different than using your imagination? Well, first, you're tapping into, once again, knowledge that you didn't possess previously. So you can ask any question, have an answer, and have it be verifiable information later on. You'll go later on and go, okay, well, what this spirit told me is completely true. Or you'll have it in a completely different language that you've got to go translate. You'll have these things where you can actually verify that you're getting information that you didn't possess earlier. Now, doing this a few times, maybe just, once again, probably 3 to 5 times of performing an evocation, you're not just going to have that voice in your head, you're going to actually start hearing it. You're going to start hearing it in the room around you. rather than just seeing, and as you're doing this, you'll start to get a sense of what the spirit is looking like, where it's standing, how it's holding itself. As you continue to perform evocation, those images that are internal at that point are going to get really, really clear, and then they're going to start appearing to the five senses. So you'll start to, and you'll get little, almost little hints of those sensory impressions as you go, where you'll be in the middle of an evocation, you'll smell something, you'll smell roses, you'll smell sulfur, you'll smell something that is entirely separate from the candles burning and the incense going, or you'll catch little, like a blip of light. Some people will see orbs of light that just all of a sudden appear and then disappear. Some people hear it banging on walls. So you'll have these little cues that something's going on that's outside of normal operating procedure, and then that'll start to get to be more the norm than the anomaly, where all of a sudden all these things are going to start happening more and more. So when you do perform an evocation, you're going to see light around you, you're going to hear crazy noises all around, and then you're going to have a spirit that actually appears in front of you. It is a matter of repeating the process enough that your senses get used to it and that your mind gets used to translating what's going on spiritually into something that you can make sense of. Any questions? All right. So, when evocation, if any of you guys are like, you need to stop, then just tell me, but I'll just keep going all day. In early evocations, they would actually have, rather than just one person sitting in a small circle doing this, they would actually have two-person evocations. So you would have one person that actually calls the spirit up and commands it and asks it the questions. And then you'd have a medium that stands there, or a channel that stands or sits there and receives information that the spirit will actually speak to it through. And in most cases, if you read about evocations that were taking place 1400 AD, you'll see that they almost always talk about having a child in the circle with you. And the one thing that children have that adults for the most part don't is great imaginations. And so that's easy to dismiss and be like, oh, well, now you're talking about just using your imagination in evocation. I thought this was supposed to be real and verifiable. Well, the imagination is actually a powerful, powerful tool that if you start using it, that you can, you have a question?
No.
Oh, okay. That if you start using your imagination as a tool in ritual, that you're going to start tapping into that fifth dimension of pure consciousness. That your imagination is not just these little electrical currents that are happening, but that you're actually receiving information and using it in some way in the world. So children have an extremely strong sense of imagination, and so they have no problem sitting in the circle and saying, well, if there's a spirit speaking through me, here's what it might say, and translating all that information completely. There's no filter between what's going on internally and what's going on externally for children. Whereas for adults, most adults, when they first get into this situation, even if you're just writing on a piece of paper, you might feel a little silly. You might be like, well, I don't know, this is just my imagination, it's odd. Even more so if you're acting as a channel where other people can hear you sounding like a complete lunatic. Most adults get a little weirded out by that, whereas children, they don't care if they sound crazy. They don't even know what that means, so they can easily just sit there and act as a channel. I personally have never used a child in evocation because I think this is exposing people to forces that maybe they're not ready for, but it is what used to occur. They'd also use people with schizophrenia or other issues where they were already in tune with the demons or possessed or whatever, to be able to act as these channels. It is a fun exercise to do with people if you want to do a two-person evocation, but there's no reason that one person shouldn't be able to get into the Theta Gamma sync and to receive the information themselves. So it's not really absolutely necessary. Yeah.
If you're doing a two-person, would both need to be in the theta gamma sync?
No, you really wouldn't, because in the theta gamma sync you're receiving, and that's a big part of it is receiving information. Honestly, it's my kind of belief that the person who's actually doing the evocation is pretty much useless. That the person who's doing the channeling is doing the real work. They're actually getting in contact with the spirit. The person who's performing the evocation, who's not in that theta gamma sync and isn't consciously connecting to these powers, is basically just a blowhard. They're just there talking to be the important person in the deal. Well, that's not really the case. That's so no. The person doing the incantations and all of that doesn't really need to be in the theta gamma sync. Now, if they're actually going through the process of evocation, just about every evocation ritual that has any kind of validity at all is going to naturally get your brainwave into these states. And one of the rituals for evocation is or aspects of some of the rituals is circumambulation, where you're basically you walk in circles. And so you look at the number or the planet associated with the spirit that you're going to be summoning. You figure out what number is associated with that planet, and then you make that many revolutions around the circle as you're doing your incantations. You'll carry your censer and swing it in a similar manner, and you're doing all of this numerology that goes along with it, and that's just once again a process to get you into the theta gamma sync. So while the operator doesn't necessarily need to be in the theta gamma sync if they've got somebody receiving, I think by the ritual itself and by the way the rituals are laid out, they're going to get into there somewhat. And I'm not sure. You have the case of Dr. John Dee and Edward Kelly. And John Dee would perform these evocations, but he said that he couldn't see spirits or anything. But he had this wonderful guy, Edward Kelly, that would come in and look into the seer stone and see the spirits and communicate what they're saying to Dr. Dee. And they came up with the system that's now known as E.A.Koetting. And there's really no reason that I can think of that Dr. Dee couldn't have done the same thing by himself, but it was kind of that two-part thing. There's also the element in there of Edward Kelly being the guy who was actually acting as the channel, was a highly prosecuted swindler. So there's also that element in there of Dr. Dee probably could have done this. Edward Kelly may have been just stringing him along, but in the process that he'd get a lot of great information. So it's hard to say either way with that. So now you can also do 4-person evocations, or as many people as you want to fit in. And this is obviously designed for one person here, but you can easily do a multiple-person evocation where each person is evoking a different spirit for the same goal. So you would have to look at the nature of the spirits, first of all. So you don't want to call Michael the Archangel and Lucifer together. They're probably not a good combination, but you look at the different spirits, see which ones will work well together, and make sure that they all have a similar characteristic and attributes. Because you look at if you look at spirits and look through any grimoire, you'll notice that they all have, well, this spirit does this spirit does this, his specialty is this. That's pretty important, because if you call on, for instance, my daughter had an illness that was just not going away when she was a baby, and it was looking really bad. And so I call on a good old friend of mine, Paimon. He's a demonic king from the Goetia. I'd worked with him a lot. He's great at manipulating people. He's great at getting people to do what you want them to do. So I call him and I'm like, hey, you're a good friend of mine. Kill my daughter. And he's like, well, that's not really what I do. And I'm like, well, you're a powerful freaking demon. Go do it for me. And her illness just got worse and worse and worse. So I called him back and I said, well, what the hell? You were supposed to heal her. This didn't work. And he goes, well, I told you I'm not the guy for this job. And okay, so I go back through my books and I find Raphael, an angelic physician. That might be a better guy for the job. So I perform that evocation, And it was within about 12 hours, her illness was completely gone. Doctors are completely astounded as to what's gone on with that would cause her to heal so fast. But it is a matter of using the right spirit for the right job. And like I said earlier, if we can see spirits as being power embodied, and if we can recognize that the one thing that power wants to do is to act, that you don't need to call these spirits up and demand that they do things for you. You don't have to use a blasting rod and threaten it in the name of some god to do what you want it to do. All you have to do is call a spirit up and say, here's a job for you. And they're happy to do it because that's what they do. That's what power does, is it acts and moves. So getting back to doing multiple person evocations, you're going to want to look at the attributes of each spirit. Find spirits that are going to work well together, that have the same basic attributes, that they'll be able to attack the same problem together. You can get as many people as you want into the evocation, so each person is evoking a different entity. So you'll look up and you'll have a whole room just filled with different entities that are being evoked that are all going to attack one problem. And you can also do the same thing by yourself. It's quite a bit more draining than having a group of people there, obviously. But you can go through and have 3, 4, 5 different spirits that you're going to evoke. So you evoke one, and then set its sigil to the side, evoke the next, set it to the side, and have a collection of spirits that you're going to command there. Or you can use what's called a magic square. So we're using sigils. So, like I said, these sigils will represent one spirit. That will be linked into that spirit. And the way that you activate a sigil is really easy. You gaze at it and use that same vision that I was talking about with getting to the theta gamma sync, where you pull your vision back until it almost starts to blur a bit, and then you think about what it is you want to have that spirit do for you. And you don't even have to perform a full evocation to use sigil magic. Just go through a grimoire, find their sigil, draw it. And this, you don't have to get elaborate with black on, or red on black or anything like that. You can just draw it with a marker on a piece of paper. And then gaze at it. And what you're going to notice as you do that is that the lines will start to disappear from the paper. That you'll be gazing at it, the line will disappear, and then it'll reappear. And when it reappears, it'll basically be glowing or floating above the paper. It'll basically go from being two-dimensional to appearing to be three-dimensional. Just about 85% of the people that I teach sigil magic to have that visual experience. The rest have a more intuitive experience of going, oh, well, it's done. They have an intuitive feeling that the sigil is now charged, so I can put it aside. But most people do have that actual visual flashing experience, at which point you can go, okay, well, it's done, you fold it up, put it away, and it'll do what you're asking it to do for you. Or you can continue in the evocation. So this would proceed, and this is the substantial contact you would make, so that would immediately proceed using conjuration or incantation to get the spirit to appear. So that's a sigil, and that's meant for one spirit. You also have magic squares, and these appear in a book called The Sacred Magic of Abramelin the Mage, as well as some other books on magic, other grimoires, and they're pretty mathematically amazing. I mean, not only do they have cool occult attributes, but if you take the numerological values, and this is a really simple one of just the name Anakim, which means giants. But if you take, you'll have squares that it has every, it'll be blocked off like that, filled with letters. You take all of the letters and give them numerological values based on the Hebrew letters that associate each of them, and then you add it any which way that you add it adds up to be the same number. And how people were able to do that is completely astonishing to modern mathematicians. They look at that and they go, well, that's really difficult to reproduce. So whatever was going on was pretty amazing, and that's something that Pythagoras, I think, started coming up with some of the first magic squares, and his were pretty simple. But the squares, rather than calling on one spirit, actually call on a whole host of spirits. And so like that is Anakim, and those are giants. So if you use that in the same way you use a sigil, so you gaze at it, you have the intention that you want that those spirits to do for you, and if you use it in a format of evocation, rather than having one spirit appear in the incense smoke, you're going to have several. When I've used that, I've had probably about 20 different spirits, very large, materialize around me. So you can use those squares, and once again, that's in the Sacred Magic of Bromlin the Mage has the most actually usable squares that I've seen. And what I've also found with that versus one spirit is that, and just using a sigil, is that you're able to get better results faster with squares. And I don't know if that's necessarily because it's a more powerful nexion into the achievement of your desires, or if it's because you've unleashed more spirits towards a goal or whatnot, but they are more potent for sure. You can also use what's called, I can't think of how this would look, but it's a house seal. So you can use a seal of Jupiter, of Saturn, of any of the planets will all have these seals attached to them. And rather than just calling on one spirit, or call on a whole host of spirits associated with that planet or sphere. And then also with demonic and angelic houses, the spirits are kind of grouped together, and so you can get that house sigil and use it in the same way. So, any other questions? I think that does it for me. I'm not sure if anybody wants to know anything else. Anything, Jason? All right.
I don't have anything.
Okay.
You guys have anything else?
I guess, can I ask some examples of how you what kind, other than healing your daughter, what other things what is this applicable to?
Yeah, what can you do with it?
Yeah.
Yeah, what is this? Yeah, because that is my focus, is practical spirituality, being able to do something with it. So, one of the main things that I'll use spirits for at this point is to call them up for information. So I like to learn things, so teach me about this. They'll actually teach me about it, and then rather than just relying on what they're telling me, I'll be able to take that and go reference it with real world knowledge and go, okay, well it does match up, and they've given me a good place to start. But in the past, I've used it a lot for settling financial affairs. So need more money, a new car, your car's about to fall apart. Whatever it is that you want in your life, you can use evocation to bring it to you quickly. Money's a big one that I've seen a lot of people use it for. And one thing that I've noticed with this is that you can use evocation to get something you want, and it comes very, very fast. But I found that it is a bit restrictive for getting long-term results. So if you want to go, well, I want to set up a private practice and I want that to do really well, and evocation is kind of hard at being able to do that for some reason. But if you go, okay, I'm starting up this practice and I need to get the money to actually put into it for the initial investment, you can do that and have that happen. And so you have to kind of look at your goals and chunk them into smaller chunks that you can actually kind of chisel your way through. And so that's one of the only restrictions I've really seen with evocation. And I think that might be more just on my part, because a lot of this does rely on what's going on internally for you, your own personal set and setting. But that is one restriction I've seen. But you can basically apply it to just about anything. I mean, I've used it once again for money. I used it to straighten out relationships, personal affairs, to start basically a lot of the projects that I'll do. If I wrote a book that I wasn't sure how it was going to do, perform evocation is to say I want this book to do really well, and it's sold out before it even hits the shelves. This project I'm in now, Become a Living God, that I'm, got this website. I'm constantly doing evocations for the programs I'll release, for different things that I'll do to go, okay, not only help me be able to present the information in a way that's going to help people, but attract people to come buy it, and I'm seeing the success skyrocket. Directly linked to the evocations, that perform the evocation, you see the result. I keep a journal, and I think that just about anybody who's going to start engaging in massive practical spirituality, keep a journal. I perform this ritual, and then when you see the success, write down the success as well. Then you flip through it and you go, well, okay, it's really easy to relegate all this to coincidence. You go, well, I did this and this happened to happen afterwards. But when you see that happening all the time, I performed a ritual and then hours later, and for me it usually is within hours, sometimes days at most, that I'll see the success. But that's really hard to refute as just being coincidence when you have that continuous stream of success.
Also, now you said when you are doing the invocation and you have the energies come and they're like a power embodiment and they want to act, they're not asking for anything in return, like there's no cost or there's no liability.
I've had the very, very first evocation I did, and it wasn't of a spirit that I got the sigil for. I basically threw together an evocation, just said, whatever spirit's there, come and talk to me. And so it came up, and I'm speaking to it through an Ouija board, the first and last time I've ever used an Ouija board in evocation. And it says, I'll give you absolute power if you perform 66 human sacrifices to me. And I'm like, well, okay, that's ridiculous. I mean, first of all, I'm not going to do that, maybe. Second, I don't know that I could get to 66 and not get caught. So, that's ridiculous. And that's got to be the only time that I've actually called and performed an evocation of an entity and they've asked for something in return. But no, it's almost like if you invite somebody over to your home, make them a wonderful meal, and then they ask you, well, what are you going to give me if I eat this? And it's like, well, this is what you want to do, or you're calling on these entities to do what they absolutely want to do, which is act in the manner in which their attributes are naturally aligned. So I call Raphael, he instantly wants to go heal my daughter. I don't have to probe him to, I don't have to threaten him to, that's just what he does. So he doesn't, his payment is being able to do something, being able to act in the way that is aligned with his attributes. So yeah. Besides that one, I've never had a spirit come up and say, well, I'm not going to help you unless you give me this. As far as
should you be careful what you're calling down or calling in?
You should. There are me, I like to play with fire a lot. So I'll look out there and I'll go, okay, well, these are the first evocation that I performed that I actually saw something in front of me, just boom, and heard a voice was of the demonic King Paimon. And so I looked through the Goetia, which is a grimoire, I looked through it, and basically let me find the biggest, baddest guys in here, and I'll go knock them out. And so I come across King Paimon, I'm like, he looks like a pretty big badass. So he's who I called, and instantly when he appeared, voice like thunder is everywhere saying, who do you think you are to have called me? And it was pretty humbling, kind of makes you feel a bit small when you've got a voice coming out of nowhere shouting at you. And my reply to that was to have to get a hold of myself and realize that the ritual of evocation works, and that humans necessarily aren't as small and insignificant as we think. We are actually extreme powerhouses, and so kind of get that recognition and shove that back at the spirit and say, no, you're going to listen to me, and completely change the operation around. But there are definite forces that, you're coming into close contact, not just having a spirit that close to you, but connecting with you where you're intuitively receiving impressions from it. It's linking with you in a very powerful way. So the main thing that you want to be careful of is, it's almost like don't hang out with people that you don't want to become like. You don't want to bring things that close into your sphere of sensation unless you want to start taking on some of those attributes. I found when I've worked with the nastier, more malevolent spirits, that I start to become more of a hateful, rage-filled person. Work with some of the milder angels, and you'll kind of see the opposite effect. Work with spiritual masters, you'll see a completely different effect. So that would be the main thing that I would caution anybody against, is make sure as you're looking at these spirits and you're going through your preparatory immersion that you want that effect in your life. And there's a reason I don't really perform evocation in my home at this point, because I don't want that in my daughter's life. Maybe I want that in my life, but I've got to obviously think about something other than that. So those are the things that I would look at is, what do you want to have in your life? What do you want to have in the lives of the people who are going to be immediately influenced by this? Because this is, even though the first few evocations are going to seem largely internal, something real is happening. And you are calling on something that is actually coming into your life and is going to have a permanent impact, and you can basically guide that impact in a way that's going to be beneficial to you. Some people do want to be hate-filled, evil people, and go for it. I mean, I'm not going to tell anybody how to act. I spent a lot of my life in that kind of mind state, and so those are the spirits I would evoke. And that will definitely feed that. So you just need to kind of pay attention to that. There is the thought that when you call a spirit, that you say, okay, I want to be able to pay off my home in the next year, right? And then the spirit goes out, and the urban legend is always that your uncle dies and leaves you a lot of money, and then you're karmically responsible for that. To which I'm never concerned necessarily about karma. I haven't seen that it affects, that there's a universal law that slaps me in the ass every time I do something wrong, but I have definitely noticed that if you want to put little kind of add-ons into that and go, and while you're at it, don't harm anybody, you can do that, and that'll be abided by. What you speak in an evocation is going to come about pretty precisely. So you can go ahead and throw that in there if you are concerned about any kind of karmic law, and don't hurt anybody while you're at it. And that is helpful a lot for people who do have that concern. So, any other questions?
So does that mean when you're doing an evocation and issuing a task that you should be extremely precise with it, or just extremely precise in specific areas that could be a problem? In
specific areas that you might want to avoid. So yeah, whatever your personal ethical restrictions are that you might not want that spirit to, because it's basically, there's the story of a rabbi that goes out, makes a golem out of clay, and performs this ritual that brings it up. So it's a living, breathing clay figure that will go and do whatever he wants it to do. And he gives it some tasks. It does the tasks, and then he doesn't want to destroy it because it's got to be a friend of his. It's like his little Pinocchio character. But he goes on a rampage and starts killing everybody in the town. He goes on an absolute rampage, and then he's at least, even if not karmically but ethically responsible for the actions of that golem. So in that way, whatever the spirit does in following your commands, you've got to take that as your ethical responsibility. So whatever your personal ethics are, if you don't want that spirit to violate them, you do have to be very specific about that. I've found, though, that when I perform an evocation, rather than saying, I want this, and here's how I want it, and here's when I need it, that I'll be a lot more open-ended, and that gets me much better results. That'll go, well, I could use some more money, just give me more money, and leave it completely open, and I've seen that a lot more will come than if I were to actually put restrictions on it and put kind of my own limitations on what it should be. So yeah, because of that, I've basically found the less specific you are, that can kind of be a better thing. You do want to be clear about your end result that you want to get, though. So if you are doing, let's say, for money, you do want to have a clear image, not of just possessing that money, but what you're going to spend that money on, what it's going to do for you, what it's going to do in your life, and have that really clear when you go into the evocation, so then the spirit can actually meet that when it actually goes out to do the task. Any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, you say that there's the spirit has like a physical manifestation. What kind of things do you see?
Well, as far as how the spirit appears, or,
Yeah.
Well, you know, some people will, like I said, will sometimes see initially like a sphere of light. That's really, really common. And once you actually get to the point of seeing the spirit there, it can go from you know, there are angels that appear dressed in armor or robes and they're glowing. There's one guy, I can't remember his name, Mulan maybe, that appears, and he's all old and sunken, and his eyes he doesn't have any eyes in his eye sockets. It's just blackness in there. There are spirits that will appear in no human form at all. It'll just be like a congealed mass of what looks like oil or smoke. So it's a really broad spectrum of what these spirits, how they appear. One thing that concerning the appearance of the spirits, there are a lot of people that assume that these spirits are in the astral plane around a poker table waiting to get summoned, and they're just sitting there in the form that they appear to you as, and that's how they just basically blip into this reality. And that can't be the case. And there are some people that say, yes, the way that they appear in the evocation is the way that they actually are. Well, if these spirits are supposedly older than the human race and older than this world, and they live in an environment that's completely not physical, why would they develop arms, legs, eyes, and all of the organs and parts of our body that we've developed and we've evolved with to help us suit our environment? So it just doesn't make sense. It seems like these would be more consciousness and a specific sort of power that you can call in front of you, and it will sync up with almost like a Jungian archetype of what that power should appear to, or what that consciousness should appear as. So if you're calling something that's Martian and you're going to call it to take out your enemies, it's probably going to appear dressed in battle armor. Whereas a spirit from Venus that you're calling on for love, it's probably going to have a much softer appearance. And this is all just related, not necessarily to your expectation, but to kind of a deeper collective consciousness type of expectation. Because what I've found is that it's really, a lot of what you experience in an evocation is spontaneous. So you don't have to go, well, I think this is how the spirit's going to appear, and that's how it appears. You'll actually have a lot of moments where you go, oh, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And that's a good sign. When you say, I wasn't expecting that, well, you can pretty much write off that you're just concocting this if you're being surprised by what you're seeing. So sometimes, spirits will take on different, anthropomorphic bodies. They'll take on half animal and half human, but there is almost always a humanoid form to them of some sort, and that does kind of trigger that realization that that's not how they exist wherever they exist. So, does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, and then another question to kind of follow that up. I mean, they're kind of showing up a little fantastical. Humans do tend to get a little intimidated sometimes. Can that ever snap you out of it, or
it's
any problems with that?
a lot of times, and especially if you're first learning how to scry or doing things like that, and you have your first contact where you see something, you hear something, yeah, it's going to pull you right out of the theta gamma sync, and you go, oh wow. But it's really easy to get back into. So that's kind of the rule of thumb, is that if you get pulled out of it, well, when you do, because you almost always, if you have to think about something, if you have to look down at your paper to see the questions you've written down, anything like that, that's going to pull you a little bit out of that theta state. And so it's a matter of just collecting that information and then getting yourself back there. Once you're there, it's really easy to get back until you've gone through the psychological retraction, and then you have to start over from scratch. But you're not pulling yourself out of it enough that it's going to be hard to get back into. So yeah. But yeah, sometimes seeing them, just having the experience of encountering a spirit is shocking enough to kind of pull you out of it. And there are spirits that, specifically those that, once again, I'm going to call demonic, even though it's hard to really pin that on them. But there are spirits that will try to take control of the ritual. So they come up, they start shouting at you like King Paimon did with me, to try to get me to go, oh, well, this is, I'm obviously not the one in control, you are. And then the whole dynamic kind of shifts there. Rather than me giving commands, I'm taking commands. And that's obviously something that you need to watch out for as you're doing evocation, is losing control over the whole thing. Because what this is about is being able to have more control over your world, more control over your life, and you don't want to give that up. Another thing to watch out for as you're performing evocation is the exact opposite, where a spirit will come and be very, really sweet, and really, what's that? Suave, there we go, really suave. And starts to kind of lull you in, and you're like, okay, I'm going to dismiss you now. And they're like, oh, wait a minute, let's talk a little more. And before you know it, you've spent hours speaking to the spirit. It's like, hey, just call me tomorrow. We'll talk again tomorrow. And they're kind of slowly reeling you into obsession. A lot of people are worried about becoming possessed by spirits. Well, the bigger concern is being obsessed with them. Because you're no longer calling them up to do something for you or to get information. You're calling them just to be in their presence, and that gets to be pretty dangerous. So, and if power wants to act, that's kind of an over-exertion of that need to act, but it's a need to act on you and through you and etc. So that
like
is something to watch
early
for.
possession or something?
What's that?
Is
That-
it like an early possession?
That is, if you look at the stages of possession, there's this guy, Father Malachi Martin, that was one of the leading exorcists in the order of exorcists in the Catholic Church, and he did identify that obsession is one of the first forms of it. And it's actually a two-way street where the spirit starts to get obsessed with a person, and then they try to make that person obsessed with them in return. And then not only are they coming around more often, but you're thinking about them more often. You're starting to spend a lot of your free time working
It's a
with them.
codependent relationship.
It is. It's definitely a codependent enmeshed relationship, yeah. And obviously that's something you want to avoid. This is all supposed to be, and this is something I am absolutely obsessed with, for sure, is ritual and spirituality and whatnot. However, there is a balance where it's like, well, this isn't my life all the time. I've got to get out, I've got to do other things, I've got to ride my motorcycle, I've got to play with my daughter. That this is a tool you can use to empower your life, but there ought to be a life outside of that you should be empowering. I mean, if you're just feeding this constantly, it's obviously not healthy. And a lot of people do get to that point where they can't have a conversation or watch a movie or anything where that this isn't the topic, and that's not healthy. And I'll find myself getting there, and a lot of people who perform ritual a lot will also find themselves getting there, where it's like, this is the center of your life, and you do have to recognize that and draw back just a bit. You've got to kind of always be doing the psychological retraction and grounding yourself. There is a life outside of this for sure. Anything else? All right, thank you guys for coming.